Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar from Whiteshell Laboratories Restoration Project team. My name is Jolene Olive, and I'm a communications officer with CNL's Environmental Remediation Management Stakeholders Relation team. I live in Lac du Bonnet, and I work at our Whiteshell Laboratories site, which is located on Treaty 1 and Treaty 3 territory, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. As an organization, CNL recognizes and appreciates the Indigenous people's connection to this place and contributions that First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening the communities where this project is situated and in this country as a whole. This week is Earth Week, and fittingly, today's webinar is an overview of our environmental monitoring program at Whiteshell. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping details before I introduce Ryan, who will be presenting today. I'll go over, we've already mentioned that today's presentation has simultaneous interpretation, which means you can listen in French or English. So you can click the globe icon in the bottom right on Zoom to select the language. And there's a slight lag if you choose French. Today's session will be recorded, so you can watch it on YouTube later if you want to, or you can share it with anyone who you think might want to listen. There's a Q&A icon to submit your questions at any point during the presentation. If your question is pertaining to anything but what we're talking about today, then we will answer you by email later. If you're having any technical issues, you can message us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca, and Rachel on our team will be watching to get you sorted out. And now I would like to introduce our speaker. Ryan Belinsky started at AECL or CNL in 2008 as an analytical scientist. From there, he transitioned to being part of the environmental program and slowly worked his way to his current role as the environmental program manager in 2017. Ryan was born and raised in Pinawa, and he is currently raising his family in Pinawa as well. So he feels that through his work, he is guarding and protecting his home and his family. Welcome, Ryan.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Yeah. Anyways, good morning and happy Earth Week. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about our environmental protection program at Whiteshell Labs. CNL's Whiteshell Laboratories are on and surrounded by Treaty 1 and 3 lands. These lands are valued for their ecological, recreational, and cultural importance. We're approximately 100 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg and 10 kilometers west of the town of Pinawa. Upstream from us is the Seven Sisters Hydro Dam, and we're located on the Winnipeg River. Most of the site is located on Treaty 3 territory, which is the east side of our river, the Winnipeg River. But some of the land on the west side is located on Treaty 1 territory. The site is located on the traditional homeland of the Red River Métis as well. In total, our site covers an area of 4,375 hectares, which is approximately 11,000 acres. As a company, CNL has put an importance on sustainability issues. At CNL, we set environmental objectives and targets to support continual improvement of our environmental performance. We set sustainability objectives and targets for energy efficiency, clean energy utilization, waste management, and conservation of resources. And this is all being done to support the continual improvement of our performance as a company and society. Just some examples of some of the initiatives that we've taken on. Just recently, we've had a small energy reduction campaign. We've focused on office waste reductions. We've looked into a compost feasibility study, and we're always on the lookout for protecting the various biodiversity species on our site. There is an initiative to provide alternative habitats for barn swallows, and we're quite often involved in tree planting activities. As we decommission our site, we are removing a number of trees. We're trying to replace those trees by planting them elsewhere in Canada. On the most basic level, when you hear about environmental monitoring, people think about the monitoring of air and water. But we're also interested in various other activities. For example, biodiversity, ensuring that our activities aren't impacting the surrounding wildlife, in particular migratory birds and any species at risk. We are also concerned about uncovering archaeological artifacts as we conduct our work and how generated waste is being handled. For example, are building materials being reused or recycled, or are they just getting sent off to the landfill? These are just a few of the things that the environmental program is responsible for and is striving to provide continuous improvement in. The company has the environmental protection staff engage very early on in any of the activities that we undertake. Starting from planning and participating in the development of detailed decommissioning plans, work plans, and environmental reviews, our staff is actively involved in the work process. It's also important to note that anybody on site has the ability to stop work if they feel that there's an environmental concern that needs to be addressed. For several years, CNL has also invited people from Seguin First Nation, Black River, and Hollowater First Nations, and citizens of the Red River Métis to join in our environmental testing activities. We want to adapt the way that we do things to best incorporate Indigenous knowledge and build trust when it comes to our role in protecting the environment. Here you can see our environmental crew working with the various Indigenous communities while they do groundwater testing, collecting mushroom samples, and blueberry samples. Along with our own testing groups, um, we invite these external members to partake in the various sample collection activities that we conduct on our site and to verify any of our findings that we publish. At the end of 2022, Seguin Anishinaabe First Nations, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, and Canadian Nuclear Laboratories launched the Independent Seguin Environmental Monitoring Program, which Seguin First Nations has named Nigon Aki, meaning land first. The collaborative and rights-based environmental monitoring program is being implemented at the Whiteshell site, but it's developed and administered by the Seguin Anishinaabe First Nations with resources and support being provided by AECL and CNL. The program was established to empower Seguin's ability to monitor and steward its territory and improve its understanding of the Whiteshell site and its operations, which is located in the Seguin's unceded traditional territory. Now, moving on to the Whiteshell Laboratories Environmental Protection Program, there are three main components which provide data to CNL on how we operate and the impact our operations are having. These three main components are the following: effluent verification monitoring, environmental monitoring, and groundwater monitoring. The information collected from these three programs gets communicated to our regulators, who are the people in government that permit us to operate and oversee how we are performing, stakeholders, which are essentially anyone who has interest in the surrounding area that may be impacted by CNL's operations, and the general public. The first major part of the program is effluent verification monitoring. This part of the program is essentially looking at the emissions coming directly from our facilities. Effluent verification monitoring essentially focuses on two things: the liquids we release into the environment and the air emissions we release into the air. I'll begin with talking about the liquid emissions we release into the environment. The two main monitoring points at the Whiteshell Laboratories are the lagoon, which houses our domestic water, essentially waste from staff washrooms, flushing toilets, and various domestic drains. And this site is continuously monitored during two periodic discharges that occur over the course of the year. Typically in the spring, right after the snow melt and after the fish spawn is our first release. And then in the fall, in preparation for the snow accumulation that is going to occur over the winter, we have our second release. The second major location is the outfall monitoring station. The outfall is continuously monitoring water flowing from our site into the Winnipeg River. This station collects water from the various storm drains on our road, water from our radiological facilities that gets released to the outfall station via controlled pump outs, and various other drains on the main campus. We monitor at we also monitor at the sources of where wastewater is generated. This is called upstream monitoring. There are two major locations where this is being conducted: Building 100, which houses the WR1 reactor, and Building 300, which houses our decontamination facility, our hot cells, and various labs. All the water generated at these two locations is tested prior to being released. We do have a couple of tanks that collect the water, where we then collect a sample, submit it to our laboratories, and it gets analyzed for various parameters. And if it meets the criteria for being released, it gets let go to the outfall. The remaining point on the image that you see is Building 200. It was historically our active liquid waste treatment building. It is no longer in operation and has in fact been decommissioned over the last couple of years. In this slide, you can see our liquid emissions described as a percentage of our overall allowable dose to the public. At the top of the image, you'll see the allowable limit, and near the bottom of the graph, you'll see that the effluent released over the last 5 years has been a small fraction of a percent. We take great pride in the fact that the amount of contamination, radioactive contamination that we release into the environment is so small. In this slide, you'll see a brief description of the various non-radiological parameters that we're monitoring in the effluent that we generate. This includes pH, conductivity, total suspended solids, which is particulate that's found in the water, oil and grease, phosphorus, phenolics, and various metals. Some recent changes that have happened on site to improve our liquid effluent emissions, for example, are changing the chemicals that we use at the laundry facility. We've gone phosphate free and have gone to as little chlorine as possible being used in the chemicals. That being said, we do still need to use some chlorine as we do have a laundry facility, and it's important to ensure that the clothes are sanitized that the individuals do use. The other big change that we have recently undertaken is that all the laundry effluent is now being directed to the lagoon as opposed to going straight into the Winnipeg River. By diverting the laundry effluent into the lagoon, it is allowing various particulate and metals to settle out into the lagoon before being directly released into the Winnipeg River. The next major component of the effluent verification monitoring program is our air emission monitoring program. This slide shows what used to be three major locations for monitoring air emissions. As I indicated before in the liquid slide, Building 100 is the building that houses our reactor. Building 300 houses our hot cells and shielded facilities and our decontamination center, as well as our labs. And then Building 200, which used to house our active liquid waste treatment center. Each of these buildings do emit air emissions into the air, and there are filters installed in the stacks for the buildings that pick up any radioactivity that permit us to determine the amount that we're releasing into the environment. Again, you can see that our operations yield quite a bit our operations yield a small amount of radioactivity compared to what we're permitted to release. We're even a smaller fraction of a percentage when it comes to our air emissions. Whiteshell Laboratories also does some non-radiological monitoring of our air effluent. In particular, it's dust particulate. And anytime a building is demolitioned or decommissioned on our site, we do actively monitor for the amount of debris that we send up into the air. And the other big thing that we monitor for is our greenhouse gas generation on site. For greenhouse gases, this is basically determined by the amount of fuel that we use or any refrigerants that get released through the course of our operation. We do have building chillers, we do have fridges, and we take note of any time there is an incident where one of these devices does release some of the refrigerant into the environment, and we report to Environment Canada. In this slide, you can see the continuous improvement that Whiteshell has had over the last couple of years when it came to our greenhouse gas emissions. As you see, in 2013 to 2014, there was a significant drop in the amount of greenhouse gases being generated by our site. During this period, there was a big initiative to stop using number 2 fuel heating oil. As the site was transitioning from going from a directly heated site powered by our powerhouse to each individual building being independently supplied with electricity or heat to enable decommissioning, Whiteshell transitioned from number 2 heating oil to electric heat and propane heat. And as a result, you can see a drastic reduction in the amount of greenhouse gases that has occurred from that decision. 2014 on to 2022, you can see a slight reduction in the greenhouse gases happening as we continue to decommission and demolish buildings on site. The next major part of our environmental protection program is environmental monitoring. Environmental monitoring really focuses on the effects, the emissions, and the effluent we release into the environment is having on the general public and the ecosystems. Just to give you a brief idea of the scope of our environmental monitoring program and the area that samples are collected from, we have provided this figure. As you can see, the majority of the samples are collected around the Whiteshell Laboratory actual site, but we do have sample locations located upstream in the nearby town Pinawa and all the way downriver to Great Falls. Some of the samples that the Environmental Protection Program do collect focus on the Winnipeg River. We're collecting water, river sediments, and fish from the river system. We're also focused on the ditch water that gets released from our site and the soil on our actual site. By looking at the soil, we're also interested in the amount of bioaccumulation that occurs, crops that grow in the soil in the nearby communities, or even natural vegetation that grows on site. We're monitoring to see if there is any radioactive uptake or bioaccumulation occurring. And likewise, we're also interested in the various game animals surrounding the site to see if any bioaccumulation is occurring when those animals eat the plants that grew in the soil in the surrounding area. We're also monitoring radiation up and down the Winnipeg River, and that is what the ambient radiation dose is all about. Just to give you an idea of some of the foodstuffs that the environmental monitoring program are currently interested in and actively collecting samples in, we have created this table for you. I want to highlight mushrooms, wild berries, and wild rice. These are recent additions to our environmental monitoring or protection program that are included based on the interest of the traditional knowledge that the Indigenous communities have passed on to us. They have clearly indicated that a large portion of their diet includes these food sources, and as a result, we have incorporated into our program. For those of you interested in the actual game meat that we collect, we typically focus on food sources that humans would be consuming. So for our area, that would include deer, bear, and grouse. We do not actively go out and kill these animals. If there has been a roadkill incident or a sighting of a dead animal, our environmental field crew would go and retrieve a portion of the body, um, typically the flesh and a chunk of their bone, hindquarters if it's like a deer, for example. And we would process both the flesh and the bone to determine the amount of radioactivity that is accumulating in their body just from living in the area. In this table, we're highlighting our environmental monitoring results for the year 2020 and the last 5 years. As you can see, there's very negligible impact based on water ingestion, fish ingestion, and various crops and meat from the surrounding area. Everything is in millisieverts per year, and the annual dose allowed to the public is 1 millisievert, and you can see we are an extremely small fraction of that limit. Now, most of you are probably not familiar with the millisievert unit, and this is just a diagram indicating what some typical activities an individual might experience and the amount of millisieverts that an individual would receive. As you can see, the radiation dose that you would be receiving from our actual operations is less than a dental x-ray that you would receive on your annual checkups to the dentist. And another interesting fact is that cross-Canada flight, you would receive more of a radiation dose than you would living by our nuclear facility. The next major component of our environmental protection program is groundwater monitoring. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're looking at the water sources underneath the ground. We do recognize that people in the area do have wells. And the other important thing to note is that the groundwater does feed into the Winnipeg River eventually. In this image, it's just an example of the location of the various wells that we have on our site. I really want to emphasize the area around our waste management area. It is extensively monitored. The whole point of our groundwater monitoring program is to ensure that the various facilities and structures that we have in place that are keeping back some type of waste are functioning as designed, that there's no breakdown in the structural integrity and contaminants are being released into the environment. Along with the waste management area, there are 3 other major areas that we are looking at to ensure that no contaminants are being released into the environment. This includes our lagoon. We also have a landfill on site that used to be operational. It's currently closed down and not receiving any new material, but we're still waiting to remediate the land. So the groundwater monitoring program is still going on until the waste has been addressed. And the last site is our Whiteshell main campus. The main campus, the major reason that we've started to conduct a groundwater monitoring program is in preparation for the possible entombment of the WR1 reactor. Right now, we're in the process of collecting background information and the hopes that eventually the reactor will be entombed, and it will then serve as the baseline to ensure that the whole grouting process is functioning as intended, and there are no unintended releases that we weren't anticipating. The groundwater monitoring program also acts as an early warning indication system before any of the contaminants get off site and get released into the Winnipeg River. Another portion of our environmental protection program is our biodiversity monitoring. In the past few years, we have been focusing on species at risk. It's been recognized that there are a couple of species that we have to be on the lookout for. Barn swallows is one, snapping turtles is another, and then there are two bat species, little brown myotis, and one additional one that is escaping me that we're actively on the lookout to ensure that any of our operations isn't having an impact on their habitats. We frequently, each year, we're on the lookout, seeing if any of these endangered species are nesting on any of our work sites. And if they are, we are stopping work until they finish their breeding season and move on for the winter. Another important thing to note with our biodiversity monitoring is we do keep track of any animal mortalities that occur on our site. Staff frequently check the roads regularly to see if any of the animals have died on site. And this general staff is informed to notify environmental if they stumble across a wounded or killed animal. We keep records of all this to, well, first of all, see if there's anything that can be done to prevent these incidents from happening, and take action when it's warranted. Anyways, that's a brief introduction into our environmental protection program. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, I believe now is the time to ask them.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Before we get to our questions, we have a few questions for our viewers as well. So we're going to put out a couple of polls. The first one is up there right now. Did the presentation have the right level of detail for you to understand the material covered? So if you could please answer that question that's up on your screen right now. Wait. Still getting a few answers coming in, so we'll just wait a minute here. And then the other question, what other topics would you be interested in learning about from the Whiteshell Laboratories Restoration Project team? So that one's a type in answer. So we'll just give you another moment to type in your answers for that one as well. And if you think of any other questions that you have in the coming days or weeks or months, you can always email us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at any time. And then also, if you have any questions right now for Ryan, you can please put them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and he will be happy to answer any questions you might have. I have a question for you, Ryan. Can you tell us how you keep birds from nesting on the buildings that we are taking down on site?
Oh, that's a good question. Our number one line of defense, I guess, is the implementation of bird netting. We erect bird netting around any of the designated buildings that are scheduled to come down in a given demolition season. And yeah, wrap the building around with this bird netting, and hopefully that will deter the birds from nesting there. Some other options that we use when bird netting isn't available to be used is we do have predatory calls being projected over speakers to discourage some of the migratory birds from nesting there. We also use decoys of predatory birds. We're looking into the deployment of raptors on site as well to discourage any nesting birds on site. It's a new initiative that Manitoba Hydro has communicated to us that they've found quite successful for some of their projects. So this past year, we looked at the feasibility of conducting such an activity on our site to see if the birds that we typically encounter would be impacted by the presence of a raptor. And then, of course, there's the cost of implementing such a program on our site and the wide area of our site too, whether or not it will have an effect. So that's currently being evaluated at the moment.
Cool, I like that. We have a question coming in here. So what do we do with the data regarding wildlife deaths on site? What is the process when we need to take down a building that has an active nest?
Okay, I'll start with the last question there. What's the process that we need to go through if there is an active nest on a building? Well, the first option that we have in order to proceed with the work is apply with the federal government for a permit to essentially permit either the destruction of the nest and its eggs or relocating the nest to a different area that would not be impacted by our operations. In all honesty, it's quite difficult to actually receive a permit to enable this. The federal government has taken the approach that we should be designing our decommissioning activities outside of the bird nesting season. That being said, if you do choose to undertake demolition activities during the bird nesting season, you need to demonstrate that you're putting in deterrents to prevent the birds from nesting there. If a nest still does occur, you're free to apply for a permit, but you have to demonstrate the need why the nest needs to be either destroyed or relocated in order to get awarded the permit. Typically, there has to be a human health reason, or it has to be in the best interest for the birds. For example, if a birds have built a nest on a radioactive building and are getting exposed to potential radioactive contaminants, it's in the best interest of the bird to destroy that nest and have it recreate a nest elsewhere on site. Could you repeat the second portion of the question that you asked?
Yes. So what do we do with the data regarding wildlife deaths on site?
Couple of things. Each year we issue 3 environmental monitoring compliance reports. each focusing on a different aspect of our program. So that data would typically either be communicated in the environmental monitoring report or the environmental assessment follow-up report. The environmental monitoring report is essentially the impact our operations is having on the public and the environment. And the environmental assessment follow-up report is a report that indicates all our requirements and obligations that we've indicated to the regulator that we are going to put in place to enable us to decommission our site. So it gets communicated in those two reports. The third thing that gets done is, depending on the animal, it may also get included in an annual report that we send out to the province that enables us to have a wildlife scientific collection permit. We basically have to report on all the wildlife activities that we've undertaken, and
Oh, your audio is cut out, Brian.
can you hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Okay, sorry about that.
Nope, that's good.
When did I cut out?
I'm not sure exactly when you cut out. I think we can move on to the next question though. So
Okay.
Do you work with local hunters to gather samples from big game harvested in the area?
In all honesty, it's something that we've looked into, but we haven't really done at the moment. We like to be in control of the actual sample, like know where it was collected from, how it was processed, and by interacting with local hunters, you may not necessarily be able to ensure all that data is accurately captured. That being said, I know there's discussion with in particular, the indigenous communities about the various animals and fish that they are consuming. So we are possibly going to be entertaining some processing of samples collected by the general public. But at the same time, there is some concern for the various reasons I've indicated before. We're also looking to partner with Manitoba Conservation. Any, I guess, incidental kills from their netting operations or roadkills that they've noticed, we're hoping that they would get in contact with us and provide those samples too. In particular, when it comes to like endangered species or species at risk. I know there's an interest in sturgeon, for example. It makes up part of the diet of the indigenous communities, but it being a species at risk, we sort of feel that it's a little, it's not in the best interest of the environment to actively be pursuing to net these species. So we're looking at those types of alternatives. So
Okay.
that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Where do you gather the fruit and vegetables for the data?
The fruits and vegetables, it depends. There are some wild berries that are collected and mushrooms that are collected. We do have 3 monitoring locations, typically within 15 kilometers of our site. Milner Ridge, if you're familiar with that, is, I guess, the farthest west. The farthest south is pretty much at the Whiteshell Provincial Park entrance and at the old underground research laboratory. We collect samples there too, which is owned by ACL. Regarding the other vegetables, we typically rely on hitting up local farmers markets. both upstream and downstream of us, and we do purchase vegetables from those markets and process those and see the amount of radioactivity contaminants in those sources of food.
Thanks, Ryan. We've got another question here. When sampling and analyzing wildlife tissues for radionuclides, have you considered sampling organs of particular interest to Indigenous communities, like livers, for example?
No, we haven't focused on any of the organs yet, or actually, in all honesty, we haven't looked into it. We have been looking more into the fleshy, meaty parts, I guess would be the best way to say it. But that is a very interesting question. I assume various organs would accumulate radioactivity at different rates. So it is something that we may need to look into. It's a good question.
Okay, well, those are all the questions we have for now, Ryan.
Okay.
So if anyone else has any more questions after this, if something comes up, then once again, don't hesitate to email us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca. And we will also be posting this webinar on YouTube, so you can watch it later and share it with anyone who you think might be interested in it. And thank you so much for attending our webinar today.
Before we go, I've thought about the organ question a little bit more. At the
Okay.
moment, I don't think it would be something that we entertain because in all actuality, we're seeing very minimal radioactivity in the actual flesh of the game animals. So at the moment, there would be no further need to explore the animal any further to see if there is great presence of radioactivity in their organs, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, Ryan. And thanks to everyone who is here with us today, and happy Earth Week, everyone. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this.
Well, we can end the webinar now. Thank you.